Okay, before we get started, I just want to encourage everybody to take a moment and appreciate the community you're a part of. Not just nerds who use our off work time to work for 3 days, but the whole extended family of history educators. We are so glad you're here. And while the conference is free, we could not put on this kind of event without help from a lot of people. Leaders from Arizona, Maryland, Ohio, Oregon, Utah, Washington, the World History Association were all essential in making this event happen. So if you enjoy this conference as much as we think you will, do us a favor. Take a moment to join your local state council for the social studies. Join the WHA. It isn't much, but it makes a huge difference. Check out our contributors page for details.
Welcome back, everybody. I don't know about you, but my head is spinning in a good way over the ideas and topics we've covered so far. Day 2 of the OER Conference for Social Studies will come to a close after one more live discussion. I just want to say I took a second during my break here to read through the topics as one does, and I'm really awestruck by all the amazing collaboration that's going on there. We've got some folks who've been with us since day 1, sharing ideas, really bouncing off others, and I really appreciate that sense of community. Keep that going as much as you can as we move past the session. For our final live discussion today, we will look at the power of media. It's not exactly a small topic, and I'm sure it comes up in your classroom almost daily. But we are fortunate to have as our moderator for this session, Sousan Arafeh. Dr. Arafeh is a professor of educational leadership and policy studies, special assistant to the Dean of Southern Connecticut State University's College of Education, and the co-director of the Integrated Justice and Social Change Collaborative. Her studies have focused on the intersection of education and telecommunications policy. She's a former deputy director of the U.S. Department of Education's National Center for Technology Innovation, and the author or co-author of numerous publications on teens, technology, and STEM. Woo. Joining Sousan today are Jessica Brown and Jim Bentley. Jessica Brown has been a teacher at Parker's Chapel High School for the past 14 years. She currently teaches psychology, AP US History, and AP Psychology. She was named Arkansas History Teacher of the Year by the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History in 2019. Jim teaches 5th grade in Elk Grove, California, as a national faculty member for the Buck Institute for Education and a teacher ambassador for the Bay Area's public radio station, KQED. He is passionate about integrating filmmaking, podcasting, and media literacy with project-based learning and puts a special emphasis on environmental science. Well, I guess this is the perfect group to discuss the power of media. So lights, camera, action.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jason. I am really excited to be here with Jessica Brown and Jim Bentley to discuss the power of media in the context of social studies teaching and more broadly. That was a wonderful introduction, and we are thrilled to be here. So also welcome to all of our viewers. Thank you for joining us. I see that we're at 184 and climbing, so that's very exciting. Keep our viewers coming. So I'd first like to begin with a few words to set the scene. Let me start by saying that media are the key building blocks of social and historical experiences. Basically, what we learn and understand about our world is based on media-mediated narratives and texts. They're narratives and texts that they only tell part of the story because they come from unique viewpoints or perspectives, and they can only portray unique viewpoints or perspectives in a limited way. And so what we want our students to know is to be able to understand this about media. And we want them to not only critically explore how media shape what we know about our world, but how media affect the way that they create and share their own understandings of the world. As everybody knows here, social studies teachers have a unique and important role in the development of our young people. They help our students become socially and civically aware and engaged. And in your talk tracks, Jessica and Jim, and in the talk tracks of many of your colleagues, the role and power of media in how we understand our world and especially how we can change it for the better is noted. And so understanding the role of media in creating knowledge and social change, whether that changes in the past, the present, or the future, is really crucial. Media are all around us. We're inundated with new information, entertainment, advertisements, and social media on like a near constant basis. Accessing, creating, and distributing written, graphic, audio, and video texts has never been easier, and nor has their control been both more concentrated and more distributed, as I know that you'll talk about. And so while many students are more expert at consuming and producing the various kinds of media that are available to them than their parents or teachers, perhaps than we are, we all need to be able to evaluate the nature of these media texts. Are they real? Are they reliable? What claims do they make? What evidence are they based on? What viewpoints do they advance? We want to support our students in being critical media consumers and producers, and we ourselves want to be critical media producers and consumers. We want to give our students and ourselves the tools to use media for positive social change. So we are here with you to get your insights on how to do that, and also to do that in a context right now that is really fraught with a lot of concern around what we can and cannot do, what we can and cannot say, what is and is not appropriate. And so we welcome you, Jessica and Jim. And with that as a foundation for our discussion, I'd like to just first ask a few general questions about media, social studies, and media literacy. So, Jessica, I'll start with you and just to ask, you're both social studies teachers, have been for a long time. Just really briefly, what do you feel the role of social studies is generally as a discipline these days?
Okay, well, ultimately, social studies is about people. And that's what I try to emphasize with my students, whether we're looking at people that are living back in the past with different technologies than we have currently, or we're looking at something that just happened yesterday in our neighborhood. People have the same motivations and they have the same ideas to some degree. Experiences are varied and we can learn through all of those different things. And so when we look at people in the past, I try to get them to make connections to, although the technology is different, to something that they're living in now.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much. And Jim, how about your thoughts on that? Social studies as a discipline?
Yeah, I would call it social sciences because that's what my Bachelor of Science is in. For me, it involves looking at a community, a region, a place, the people that inhabit it, but also more importantly, or as important, the environment in which they live and they interact with. So it's the flow and ebb of resources and people into places, the connections that are built, the impacts that are had, and how that changes over time, layering in elements of the geographic perspective, be it ecology, geography, geology, culture, and so forth. So to me, it's looking at a web of things and how they interact and the spaces between the points that we oftentimes identify in standards and different things that we teach.
Wonderful. Well, I think that kind of global notion of the import of the social sciences, and I like that you make that distinction, is really important. And then also the fact that it's really about people. It is about people who are with us historically, who we are now, and I'll always say, the past, present, and the future, because we have a big future coming toward us all the time. You talked about media ecology, Jim, and I just want to ask the question about media. So, media in the past meant a more narrow set of things, newspapers, television, that kind of thing. How do you define, and I'll go with you, Jim, how do you define media right now? Do you define it differently from perhaps the way your students define it? I'm just curious because we're talking about the power of media.
Yeah, for me, I would define media probably differently than my students because they're probably thinking about it from a more consumptive point of view, be it TikTok or social media, or be it watching YouTube or playing games, interacting with it that way. But for me, media would involve both a constructive, portion of it and also a receptive portion of it. So there's building of media products, there's reception of media products, and it's printed materials on screen or paper. It's involving images, it's involving audio, video, sounds, all of those aspects of media that are basically essentially trying to communicate something. It could be from petroglyphs to skywriting with different access to different kinds of modes of media and different skill levels of using and consuming those different media as well.
Right. I love that you're including the petroglyphs, because do we often think of the petroglyphs? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah. How about you, Jessica? Media for you and for your students.
I have to agree with Jim completely. Like, they look at the consumption aspect of it themselves as products, although they might not necessarily use it that way. They wouldn't say it exactly that way. But media is really anything that's trying to communicate a message to you in some way. So yeah, technology looks completely different. Petroglyphs, I do love that too. Or what this TikTok just was trying to teach me. Either way, it's communicating those things. So media is everywhere in every message that we're getting. That was probably not a great answer, but
I think that makes sense. And according to Jim's response, I think he agrees with that as well. Well, now I want to. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to add, we have to be careful not to be elitist or snobbish toward different kinds of media, because if it communicates effectively, it's legitimately media. So like it or not, if it can communicate something and influence, we have to take it into consideration.
Right, right. Well, I'm looking in the Q&A, and I see that Brian Moore has given us the next segue to media literacy, which I wanted to ask about as well. So Brian asks, is media literacy in some way a path to equitable knowledge? So he is asking about sort of whether or not it creates this equitable element. I would like to ask first, though, what is media literacy? Because we talk about it as if everybody knows what it is, but I think it's probably different things to different people. And again, different things for you than it is from students, and maybe even parents and administrators. So Jessica, why don't we go with you first on that one?
Okay, so when I consider media literacy and when I'm teaching it in my class, it's the whole like microcosm of it. So it is who produced it, why they might have produced it, what it means. Now, for my students, initially when they're coming into class, if they receive a piece of media and they understand the thesis, then that's media literacy to them. Like, I understood it, so I've got it. But then we get into those different layers of, okay, what was the purpose behind this? I think you mentioned it in your intro. Who is doing this and why? And that's the full scope of media literacy in my classes.
Wonderful. And Jim, how about you, media literacy?
Media literacy really involves the responsible and critical consumption and also production of media. And I think building off what Jessica said too, it's, who's speaking, why are they speaking? What's their motivation? And also too, Hank Green from Crash Course, he makes a comment of who's not speaking or who's not talking about this, because that's also sometimes an absence of media or an absence of voice is just as strongly communicative than not. And then the other thing too, I think that goes along with it is being critical. Teaching explicit concepts like KQED does in San Francisco with their media literacy boot camps that they have. What is lateral reading? What is fact checking? Those kinds of elements are really critical, especially if we're talking about, what is truth? We're not in a post-truth society. Some of us are in a post, critical thinking mode, and we're not leaning into that discomfort to question what we know or why we know it or how do we know it. So those are elements of it too.
Yeah, it's really true. And especially when it's so hard to know how, media are becoming very seamless, right? It's hard to know how things really are produced and where they're produced. As you and others in some of these talk tracks have said, encouraging students to produce media help them understand how they are these constructed messages, and so that's a big piece of helping them develop media literacy in one kind of way. Rachel Hansen here in our Q&A says, well, how do you help students filter through the various claims that they encounter across these various meetings to find the truth? She's asked about the truth, and I'll question, is there a truth? But how do we help our students navigate some of this? How about you, Jessica? You go ahead.
Okay, so I wish that I had just like, this is how you do it. Here's the truth. The fact is, it's difficult for me, and I have lived in this world for a decade. When I'm asking a student to go and find the truth, knowing that several things may be fighting against them, like what their browser algorithm has decided to show them, for example. The best that I can come up with is I allow students to collect all of the different things that they consider to be reputable. I do the same. We anonymize them sort of, and then we all go through them and say, hey, deeper than just why I believe this is true. Who produced this? Those things that we were discussing before. It is difficult to find what's true, and what's true for some people is different than others. So if that answers your question.
It does, and I think the idea of what's true for some is not true for others. That's an important concept to help us understand. Certainly, historically, we understand that certain histories are written from certain perspectives by certain people, and we don't see. I think this gets to your idea, Jim, of the absence, right? We don't see other people's stories, and so which is true. It's there are these different perspectives. And Jessica, you talked about anonymizing as a strategy, anonymizing these things that you and your students have come up with. Can you just talk a little bit more specifically, like how do you do that?
Sure. If a student is bringing a source, generally we'll have like a cloud-based folder of some kind, and we're all in it and everyone can edit it, and we all add what we believe to be reputable sources. And we're never going to say, oh, who put answers.com on there? But we might discuss answers.com all together and say, why might this not be a good thing? It's also great because you see, if there are 12 TikTok videos on there, maybe the knowledge base of that class or their source base is not that varied. And so that's why we all think the same thing. And you can use that tiny example to show them that's true in the world too. Like in South Arkansas, which is where I teach, our knowledge base may be not varied either. So we need to start looking at other perspectives.
Wonderful, thank you. How about you, Jim? How about you on this question?
So what is truth, or is there truth? Is that?
Well, that's part of it. Yes.
Yeah. I think truth is what I understand it to be right now. And I think as I understand more, then my perception of truth and my students' perception of truth might vary and change as well. And I think looking at events, I think looking at characters, I think looking at challenges faced, I think looking at choices made, and trying to look at those from multiple perspectives. Doing the same thing with our media. It's good to see media that you're not accustomed to. It's good to look at some sources that you're not accustomed to. I watch and listen to a variety of people. Some I listen to more, some I tune out more. And I think we have to, teach our students to critically consume and balance things that maybe get them to challenge or question their own thinking, as well as challenging and questioning the thinking of others. Because if it's always me questioning you because that doesn't fit with me, I'm doing myself a disservice. I'm insulating myself. I'm putting myself in an echo chamber, and students and adults don't need that. What we need is taking media in, pondering it, questioning it civilly, respectfully, but critically as well.
Right. Can you say, you both teach at different grade levels, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you encourage that kind of thinking and discussion among your students, and particularly if there are students who may have viewpoints that diverge from most of the students in the other class. What are the kinds of strategies that you use for that? Yeah, Jessica, go ahead. You look like you might have something to say.
Yeah, I do. Well, I do, but it may not be the perfect answer. For me, it is walking into a discussion with students. And again, I do teach upper level students, so you would have to make this applicable to your classes. But I walk in there and my students don't feel as though I have a preconceived idea of what the right answer is. Like Miss Brown knows the right answer, and nothing you can say can convince me otherwise or let me see anything different. Because if you walk into a conversation and you're modeling that kind of vulnerability, really is what it is, for students, then they feel more comfortable in the things that they're saying. Now, if I'm talking about a specific topic that I know may re-traumatize or hurt a student in my class because of things I know about them, that's a discussion that student and I may have beforehand. I also practice something where they are free to exit at any time if they just need to step outside for a second. All I ask when they do that is that they'll just write down what made them feel like that, and they don't have to share that with me. They don't have to read it to the class, none of those things, but I want them to process. I was just in a really difficult conversation, and what did I get out of that, and why did I need to step aside for a minute? And I model that too. There are times when I say I'm not equipped in this moment to answer that question, but I'm going to research and I'm going to think about what you're saying. I'm just going to listen right now. And I think it's just kind of being not necessarily their peer, but on the same level when you're talking about especially emerging current events that are happening right now today that you're still processing.
Right.
They need to see us work through those things, because we're going to have a maturity level that's different than them. And I don't know, if they're going to be successful doing this as adults, they need to see somebody doing it. And it's really hard. Like, it's difficult for me, but it's worth doing.
Right. And you had said that in your talk track, and actually listed a number of things about how it is that you go about in that practice. But I want to highlight what you said about vulnerability and about how you yourself are processing through this in many ways, not knowing how to do it or what to do, and taking the time to learn and to model that for students, as well as giving them an opportunity to process on their own. I think that those kinds of strategies are really important, because our students really do need to process a lot of this information in real time with models. So Jim, how about you? What's your approach?
You know, some of the things that Jessica's sharing, I absolutely love, and some of them I do, and some of them I would like to talk to you more about how I can incorporate it in. But I work with 5th grade students, so ultimately it comes down, for us to really focus on questions. What questions do we have? What do we notice? What do we wonder? I love some of Project Zero's thinking strategies and routines that they put out. What do you notice? What do you wonder? I used to think, but now I think. Journaling to process some things. I mean, after the 2016 election, I had students that were in tears the next day. I had students that were cheering the next day, and it was a great moment to pause and think and say, journal. We're going to journal. What are you thinking? What are you wondering? What are you concerned about? What's at the top of your mind right now? And daily writing is something that we do every single day in terms of processing either personal thoughts, or sometimes it's responding to a prompt that's designed to elicit ideas about something that we're studying or something that's happening. But giving kids space to think, modeling, like Jessica said, the questioning process. I keep coming back to questioning events, talking about events. Kylene Beers has some really great reading strategies for nonfiction and fiction. What surprised you? What challenged, changed, or confirmed your thinking? What did the author, or the speaker, or whoever assume that you already knew? What's confusing to you? Those kinds of questioning skills. I think teaching questions is more important than teaching answers and content. And if we can get our kids questioning in a truly authentic, exploration type mode, I think we can model that vulnerability, that curiosity, the fact that we don't have the answer. I always tell my students, the more I learn, the less I know. Kind of scratch your head and like, what? I'm like, no, every time I learn something, I realize that there's more to know to it. Sherry Barton is a teacher in Idaho and a National Geographic teacher friend, and she said something that really stuck with me, which is, when I begin a unit of study, my goal is for students to finish the unit with more questions than they began with. So I think really, having students be okay with the fact that they don't know things, or they don't know as much as they want right now, it's a good way to help them lean into discomfort. It's okay to be uncomfortable with not knowing things. We'll get there, or we'll get closer to it.
Right. And it encourages a certain kind of patience, right? In terms of patience with themselves, with you, with others. Yes. So let me ask you then to talk a little bit about really, how are you incorporating media in your classes? Each of you in your talk tracks, you shared activities that you did that actually had a kind of a social impact on your individual communities. And I'm curious if you can tell the short version of a story, perhaps how you got there, why you got there, whichever piece you'd like to share. And how about we start with you, Jim, on that?
Our launch into media was really almost purely accidental. I mean, we were kind of playing around with making PSAs and we started dabbling in some of those kinds of things. But ultimately, our first big launch was we presented a project idea to our city to recycle batteries, and they said, hey, we can't do that, but what you can do is build an informational film for us. And it was like, wow, we got an authentic client with a real authentic purpose. Kids know how to write and research. Gosh, if we can write it, we can film it. And that's really what it turned into. We learned a lot about B-roll footage and voiceover and editing. And the tech part was not the hard part. It was really the storytelling part. So, buttons in tech are fairly simple once you, bang around with them for a little bit. But yeah, I mean, that's the short version. We had an authentic need, and we were able to build a media product that actually fit that need for our city.
Wonderful. And how about you, Jessica? What's the story on your side?
Well, mine really came from geographic location. We're about 2 hours from some of the Japanese internment camps that are in Arkansas. And then like an object, a primary source that my kids had chosen, it was actually a boy their age. I try to get as many sources that they can directly relate to. It was a boy their age, a Japanese boy who was moved from his home in California to Arkansas. And one of the quotes is, I had to forget everything I was taught about my democratic country. And that just resonated with those kids, because they're like, this is someone who is not exactly like me, but has been completely uprooted. And what would that be like? And like Jim said, the kids telling the story and deciding that, okay, we want to contribute to historical knowledge in our area in this way. A documentary became natural because they were gifted in that way. And that was something that they felt they could disseminate and do a screening of, and everyone could see pretty easily. But it built right off of the thing that we're talking about, media, a source, and then they took that to its natural conclusion for them.
Right. Now, in that process, I imagine that neither of you knew how to do all of the technical things. And so, and as we re-enter into school, whether we know that we're doing it in person or still virtually, can you talk a little bit about how you have engaged with the technical aspects of this or not? Maybe your students have, and any advice you have for teachers going forward. Jim, why don't you start with that one?
Just-in-time learning has been like the name of the game for the last 20 months. So what I've learned is find people who know more than you, find organizations that offer free training. Plug for KQED. If you check out KQED Teach, a ton of free workshops, and some are facilitated. Many of them are online self-paced modules. I learned how to podcast from KQED. Video production, a local cable consortium offers trainings for that. We should watch out for the blind spot that some of us have. Oh, kids are so tech savvy. Yeah, but not like what we're trying to do here. So sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. Connecting with professional learning networks, with folks who know more or who can coach and guide, that's been hugely helpful. Last year was kind of a black hole for us in many ways because we weren't doing our traditional filmmaking because kids weren't on campus. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of pushed me into more the mode of multimedia storytelling. So using things like story maps with photography, with audio clips, with short video clips, because every kid has their phone. But organizations, finding people, finding networks, staying curious, and then being willing to start using that technology. Maybe when you're not 100% ready, but at least starting it with kids on some low level entry kind projects that you can get started with.
Excellent. How about you, Jessica? What's your experience?
I'm echoing Jim. They consume a lot of media, so they think that they know what goes behind producing it. So we really did start, okay, let's look at the University of Little Rock, who has done something with the Japanese internment, and contact them. Let's contact the museum that's down here. And we started from the story level. Okay, what are we trying to say? And then they did some practice shoots, and they would watch it and they would be like, that interview was awful, because they didn't really know how to do it. So they're looking at these different techniques and kind of, what am I trying to say? It was like a learn and go process. Mm-hmm. But as far as the technical aspects, one of the things that was empowering to students was, I don't really know how to run Final Cut Pro. Brennan, will you figure out how to do it and then do a teach for all of us? Thank you. I do know how to run an interview. I'll help you with that. Those kind of things. And then just to see that collaboration again alongside them was very beneficial.
Right. And that's authentic learning, isn't it? I mean, that really is how we learn in general, and it's a wonderful model. But I'm sure a lot of people will say, well, you know, that sounds like a lot of time. I've got a lot of material to cover. I've got to stick with the standards. I've got to sort of keep within the expectations of a more maybe standard approach to education within my school or administration or community. What do you say about that? We'll start with you, Jessica. We'll go that way.
Well, I did this in an AP US history class, so that's national, and all my AP US history teachers in here are going, that we had to take some extra time. We had to do some things that were outside of school, or we had to do, I guess, replacement things. I'm still teaching those historical thinking skills, except my students are actually doing them instead of reading about how we should be doing them. So it did take a little extra front loading. And as someone who is like got everything paced down to the day, it was very scary. But my kids have talked more about the things they learned to transferring during that than any other thing that we did, because they learned so many different types of skills and how to interact with history, which is really what we're doing.
And I should think interacting with people around history, living history.
Yes.
All right. Jim, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, it ultimately, standards, if it's designed right, you know, standards are going to be at the base of everything. So, you know, I'm not going to start necessarily with my list of standards and my calendar and my pacing guides. I'm going to start with, you know, what are some authentic needs or what are some authentic skills that I know students need to have. And I hate it when people call them soft skills, because they're not soft skills. Those are tangible things, you know, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, creativity, innovation, troubleshooting, being uncomfortable. You know, if we can design experiences that are beyond, you know, just the rote adopted textbook publishers. I mean, we'll use the textbooks too, but if we can really design an experience that has learning at the forefront and not like mandated checking off this box and that box in this assessment, then we're going to have students with interest and engagement. And if we design the experiences, like Jessica's saying, there's going to be a transfer of the knowledge, the doing, you know, we're doing it. We're not just learning it. We're not just studying it. And I always come back to the idea that there is no job that I'm aware of that asks people, you know, to hire them for project teams to bubble sheets or to write essays necessarily. You know, writing an essay is a good skill because it's a communication skill. But how many 5-paragraph essays have you really encountered in your life? You know, I mean, really, I look at Instagram accounts that are strongly advocating for social justice pieces, like the farm worker Instagram account. Follow farm worker Instagram account and see where your food comes from, and look at the text that's going into the stories behind, you know, the dignity and worth and humanity of people that harvest food. So, you know, if we design experiences right, if we build opportunities that are authentic and engaging and powerful and transformative, kids are going to learn the stuff they need to learn. That's even supported with research from Lucas Education Research recently, with a study they had with project-based learning advancing and increasing the likelihood of passing, you know, the AP test by, I forget what percent, 8 or 10, 12%. You know, you can do PBL and AP courses. It can be mutually inclusive and not that exclusive. So.
And I just want to add one more, like, just example here, because it was real life to my students. My students could have read a passage about people that were removed from their homes and taken to rural Arkansas against their will, and they had done nothing wrong. And I could also say, oh, there were people that died there and they never saw their homes again. And then I can take a group of students to stand in front of a cemetery and see those people that never got to go home again.
Right.
And that's a different experience than them here. No matter, I can't teach it that way. So that those projects, that experiential, that traveling is going to teach more to kids than I could standing in my classroom.
It's funny that you mentioned that, if I can add to that, because one of our former teachers, administrators, who has a school named after her mother, Mary Sukamoto, was a Japanese internee from Elk Grove, sent to York internment camp in Arkansas. And right around the time that we started to see the Iraq War take place, with Guantanamo Bay starting up, I had students do a documentary, an interview with her. And her message was very clear. What we saw with Executive Order 9066, we're seeing again with renditions, that are being taken place with Black sites, and it was really powerful. And students made that connection between the book A Journey to Topaz to today, 2001, 2002, or whenever there was. Those connections stay very much alive, and we keep connecting them to the present.
Well, you're making me think about sort of some of the elephant in the room is that there are all of these very difficult things that are going on in the world around us, in our nation and in the world. And our students are seeing them in the media, they're experiencing them in their homes. And we as teachers are trying to help us all come to grips with the various events, whether it's the election recently, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether all kinds of things. And so I'm curious about whether or not, just how you manage to deal with those sorts of issues in your classrooms, and also not only with students, but with parents perhaps. Because I know that there are a lot of educators who are going to say, well, we can't even talk about some of these things in our classes, and we don't know how to do that. Do you have any thoughts on how we can help our educators around the nation talk about these issues with students and the communities that they're in? Jessica, your topic, your project, was really focused on an historic issue that I'm sure was quite sensitive to your community. Mm-hmm. I'm curious as to, was there any pushback? What happened, and how do you address this, I guess, more generally?
Well, honestly, my students were a little afraid, but we're in a very conservative area. There's not a whole lot of diversity in the district that I'm in, and they knew that the community would make connections between either current immigration status or post 9/11, some of those conversations that were being had as a result of fear. And that was the point that they were making. And they knew those connections would be made. And they kind of thought that people would consider them to be judgmental. And so that is not, they wanted to educate, they wanted to expose people in their community to something that they maybe knew about, but didn't know all aspects of. So they were quite brilliant. And this is them, this is not me. They said, we're going to look at the 442nd Regiment, which is a military combat regiment. It's still the most decorated regiment for its size in American history. And it was comprised of Japanese men who were pulled from internment camps. So, okay. And they did that because they wanted to emphasize and humanize to some people like the military aspect of it, because they knew people in their community that were patriots or that were very patriotic. And so if they could put those two things together. So I said all that to say they were looking for a connection that would maybe push through any resistance, or like the idea that people were being judgmental, or that we were being judgmental or trying to teach them something. We also looked at local history of Arkansans in the time and the way that they reacted. Not to talk forever, but like there were a lot of people in South Arkansas, they didn't have running water and electricity and telephone service, and the camps had that. So for them, that was a cause of friction that was more socioeconomic than even racial. And so we tried to look through the lens of all these different things to try to defray some of that pushback. Now, it may not work for everyone, but if you're looking for those, I guess, outlets or way to help people receive what you're trying to say, I find that to be helpful.
And I'd like to highlight what you're saying in that by looking at the past, we can assume what we know about the past and about these events. But when you start looking at the details and really getting into the details of what has happened, and you look at different entities and their involvements, you see so many more connections. And what you just said about the Arkansans without water and electricity. Well, who would have known that, and that was an issue at all? So those sorts of things are, looking deeply is so beneficial. Jim, how about you? Thank you. How about you, Jim?
Coming back to objective facts and data and numbers about situations, when several years ago I was able to participate in a workshop at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and when you look at the sheer volume of lynchings that took place from like 1890 to like 1940s, and, it was several thousand. Many thousands. You know, we can look at numbers, we can ask questions related to facts. We can look at, 120,000 Japanese Americans, interned. We can look at, numbers in Guantanamo Bay. We can look at a lot of different data, and we can ask questions about those and ground them in context and numbers, and trying to understand different perspectives. When I think about westward expansion and the forced relocation of Native Americans, and you look at reservations, and then you start looking at data related to that with suicide or alcoholism or different kinds of education rates. I mean, we can look at data, we can put it into a context, and we can ask a lot of questions about those. Not necessarily preach or lecture or try to give students a perspective they should take, but we should more like ask students to take perspectives about the things that we're reading. And every year, I always have at least one or two students at different parts of the time bring up something that's in the news, or if with Proposition 8 several years ago, outlawing gay marriage in California, or other laws that might kind of light people's fires. We pause, we stop. This is with 5th and 6th grade students, and we can have a discussion that's appropriate to that age level, looking at here's one perspective, here's another perspective, here's what happened. With the Trump victory in 2016, here's what happened. Here's what some people countered opposite. What's my take on it? None of your business, because I'm not necessarily going to come down on this. With George Floyd last year, I will be honest, we looked at a lot of things. 8 minutes and 46 seconds turned to 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Kids saw video, kids saw reactions and responses. I had kids with Blue Lives Matters, stickers on binders, and I had kids with BLM t-shirts on as well. And, I think I would have been royally dishonest had I not said what I saw was appalling. And I did tell them, this is me, this is what I see, this is what I feel. I don't have all the facts, but I do know what I do see, and this is what I saw. What you saw, what you feel might be different. I think we have to be candid. I think we have to be honest, and I think we have to do it in a way that's age appropriate. We can have some very deep discussions about things from different perspectives, from facts, in a historical context. I come back to my civic ed training, we talk about authority, we talk about justice, be it, corrective or restorative justice. We talk about power. We talk about, power without authority and power with authority. There are so many things that we can ground in the world of civics. Think about Rosewood, the Rosewood Massacre of 1923, the centennial is coming up in 2 years from now, right? The state of Florida passed the first ever legislation in 1994 that created a fund to promote scholarships for students who were survivors of Rosewood. And they did this not under the idea of reparations, because you can't use the R word, but they did it under the idea of property loss. And, property loss of property, loss of businesses and homes and land. A really fascinating take on that. We can look at things from different perspectives, because I'm pretty sure Florida would not have passed the reparations law in '94, but a property loss, thing to equalize, they were okay with that. So if Florida could do that 20 years ago, I think we can have some of these conversations today.
I want to ask you both about, it seems as though you're very comfortable with the discomfort of talking about these issues, as well as, not knowing everything. What would you say to teachers who are really not used to that stance, who are really more used to being a sage on the stage, who are worried that if they don't know, if they don't show that they know most of what they're doing, that they're going to somehow lose face or not have as much respect as they might. What do you say about how they can perhaps learn to be more empathetic and to encourage this kind of mixture of ideas and approaches and authenticity? Jessica, why don't we start with you?
Well, I tried knowing it all beginning in my teaching career, and it just didn't work out for me that well. Because one of the things that I've learned about the kids that I teach, if they're interacting with you and you have rapport, then they know if you're telling the truth, and they know if you're sincere, and they know if you're faking it. And maybe that's not true at a younger level, but at my level, they pretty much can smell insincerity. And so I understand that feeling like, oh my goodness, if I don't know everything, then they're not going to write down the notes that I'm telling them. But I think you have to get past that and say, I will not lose the respect of students if I teach them that they don't have to know everything all the time and that they don't have to be perfect all the time and that no one on earth is. It's going to humanize you if it does nothing else. And I think that that creates a rapport with your students. I have never walked into one of these conversations saying, whoa, today's going to be so fun. I cannot wait. But I do know how important it is because they're in a safe place with me. And I want them to see this with someone who loves them and cares about them. Instead of the first time they experience it in a general ed college class of 80, where they say one thing and their grade is ruined. So you just kind of have to, not that it's not a serious concern, you just kind of have to think differently about it.
Okay, Jim?
I put in the chat a quote from Juan Carlos Aruz. He's a gentleman in Oakland that does a lot of work with equity. And he made this comment several years ago at a PBL Work Summit, not about what's wrong, it's about what's missing. It's not about improving, which implies a deficit, but growing. And when he said that, and I internalized it, oh my God, I have spent my entire teaching career comparing myself to other teachers, and I've always felt wholly inadequate and like a total failure. I can't do what Jessica does necessarily. I might be able to get some of her stuff, but and she can't do what I do, but she can do some of my stuff. So when I finally let down, the whole comparison sake, and I try to model this with students as well, when students stop comparing themselves to other students, when they start realizing that it's okay not to know something, that it's okay to be uncomfortable, that you don't have to have the right answer. In fact, I really respect questions more than answers. I'd rather have a kid with more questions than answers, because if you know answers, you're only repeating what you know. If you actually listen or ask questions, you might have a chance to learn something new. So yeah, we have to get over the idea that we're the sage in the stage, and we have the college degree and we know everything. No, we don't. The more we know, the more we learn, the less we know. The more we learn, the more questions are going to arise. So that's just a matter of being honest. Maybe I can do that now that I'm 50, as compared to when I was 26 teaching. I felt like I had to know these things, and in my 20s I was trying to prove myself. In my 30s I was trying to prove myself. In my 40s I was like, hey, I'm enjoying this. And now as I'm entering my 50s, I'm like, I'm okay with not knowing stuff. I'm okay with people giving me things that I don't know stuff yet. So I think it's just about being real. People that act like they're the smartest in the room, they need to find another room. They're in the wrong room, right?
And I think you're talking about the developmental arc of teaching, right? Which is in the beginning we're not as I too not as confident as I might have been had I been teaching much longer. We learn a lot from each other, from our students, etc. Yeah. I did want to raise something that I think is important. Rebecca Eisenberg, in a different talk track, she talks about how she has rethought the use of images in terms of historical moments where there may be violent imagery. So, for example, you brought up lynchings or different kinds of massacres, et cetera, and where sharing information about these historical events, including the media imagery around them, may be traumatizing to certain students, and particularly, maybe minoritized students these days, immigrant students, et cetera. I wonder whether that's something that you had thought about, or whether how you've come to think about it, if you've come to think about it more, and what you might suggest to teachers as they go forward doing this kind of work. Because I think it's more of a new idea. Yeah. Jim, why don't we start with you on that one?
I'm really careful with images that I'm willing to share with students. I teach in a district that has over 85 languages spoken. We have students from all around the world. We have a lot of Afghan and Iraqi children, Pakistani children who have seen things. So I'm real sensitive with what I bring in visually. I do love bringing in audio clips whenever I can. I love going to ListenWise. I use ListenWise religiously. That's a resource everybody should put on their radar. Audio sometimes can be a lot more intimate than StoryCorps as well. Audio can be a lot more intimate than video or images, and it's also a lot less traumatizing. But then it can be even more traumatizing if they're hearing something that's really graphic. So I'm I have a real big filter. I've learned to, if I want to do a random ad hoc, all of a sudden, Google search, it's on the screen off to the side. There's nothing live. So I'm very sensitive to that. I love using text that's straightforward. If it's a narrative nonfiction, or if it's a nonfiction account of something, but I find little bits, little snippets, and conversation and reflection. But I'm really sensitive to that, because I just don't need 10-year-olds to see stuff that would traumatize them. I want them to know the story behind these things on an appropriate level, but I don't need to be the person that reveals to them some world truth that they're not ready to see.
Thank you. Yeah. How about you, Jessica?
Rebecca's track talk really made me think a lot. Now, I am in a college level class, so I will show them images, and she mentioned Emmett Till in her talk specifically, and sort of like the decision of his mother to do something unimaginably difficult and let everyone see this image because they knew that it would resonate. I do think that there is a role for that and for helping kids process that together. But like Jim is saying, it's not every day, and I don't even know how often it is. And I think there should always be the choice for a student to know what they are about to see or witness. Like, we're not springing this on students. And if you are not comfortable being there and seeing those things, that's fine. We're not making a judgment on why you can't receive this right now or see this right now. So I will definitely be considering a lot of the things that she said, because we look at those hard images, and for my kids, I think they're appropriate, but I will be considering it, I think, is what I want to say. She made me think about a lot of things I hadn't considered. So go watch her track talk.
It is. It's a very good track talk. I'm looking here in the Q&A area. I've been ignoring the questions. No, we've gotten through a few of them. One of the things that's been asked is, do you think that we need to immerse ourselves more in the media that our students are consuming and or producing in order to understand them better and understand their world better, what it is that, maybe how they see the world and how we can help them see the world through their ideas about media? How about we start with you, Jessica?
That's one of the pieces of that like cloud-based folder that I discussed, because I can see what they believe to be, because they're turning something in for a grade in a difficult class. So yeah, or not really for a grade, but for everyone to look at. And so that kind of gives me an idea of where they are and what they believe to be valid. I do think we need to be looking at it a little bit. And I know everyone's like, I'm not getting a TikTok, Jessica Brown. I don't care what you say, but just knowing what their thought process is will help you expose some of the things that are correct in it and some of the things that aren't really helpful in the way that they think about things.
Jim?
I honestly, I'm lucky. I've had 3 daughters. I have 3 daughters. They're now aged out past 5th grade. 5 minutes left. Okay. They've kept me somewhat relevant in terms of social media and things like that. Now I'm finding that I turn to my students more sometimes to explain things to me. I've asked them to be the teacher and teach me this. I've downloaded a few different apps on my phone because I can, and I'm an adult, and show me how to do this TikTok thing. I think it's nice to know the pulse or kind of the general atmosphere of what they're doing or their mindset around it. I honestly don't have the bandwidth, nor do I have the interest to learn how to use these things. But I do want to know the mindset behind it, so I have an understanding now of why my 3 teenage daughters are taking selfies and why they're doing different things the way they do. And I would never, as a boy or as an adult male, do these things, but I get where they're coming from. So if I can tap into that or leverage that, I will, if it's
and Jim, the
appropriate.
process of asking them those questions gets them thinking about why they're doing it.
Yeah.
And so I think that is so valid.
Yeah. And it also, there's a lot of creativity in that. There are some TikTok that I see on Instagram, because I do use Instagram. I do use Twitter. There's some really creative TikToks out there. And I'm impressed at what people can do with that. So, it's a form of media. We should know it. We should understand it. If we could harness that for teaching or for projects, I don't have a problem with that, as long as, we're hitting the ethical guidelines and using media tools that aren't, predatory or, giving out information, or, kids are too young using it. I mean, I'm curious. I'd explore it more.
John Arthur, who was going to be here with us but could not, and we are missing him. He works with elementary school students doing kind of rap pieces that they put together on YouTube. And one of the questions that was raised at one point was, what do you do about, what do you do about the fact that your children, when they do these media projects, that their images and they themselves and maybe some of their ideas are out there? What are your thoughts on that, as to whether, do we need to protect them? Is it an issue at all? Are there safeguards that you yourself put in place? I'm curious about that. And actually, I'm looking at the time. We don't have too much time. So maybe a quick answer on this one, and then
3 words.
Okay.
Media release forms.
Okay.
Media release forms. No one's face is made public unless parents have consented to it.
Yeah,
And
and
it's
I'm
an
getting
ethical-
I'm getting parental consent even for 18-year-olds that are in my classroom, because you're in charge. I want students to know that you're in charge of how you're portrayed online. And just because it's part of a project doesn't mean that you have to consent. So, and parents know how we're using it, and they're going to get to view it beforehand. That is a safeguard, and it has always worked for me.
Excellent, excellent. I see that there are a number of questions in here about, students analyzing media, helping students analyze newer media. How do you analyze, how might you encourage students to analyze media in the context of a network of people rather than as individual objects? And then also, I think in general, this notion of also looking at analyzing media and developing an ethical stance toward the analysis and the production. Jim, go ahead.
Go to KQED's, check out their media evaluation bootcamp facilitated teacher course, or the self-directed one. That's going to give you a really good head start in terms of how to evaluate media systematically in terms of teaching it to students. It was a lifesaver for me. Excellent.
Yeah. And how about you, Jessica?
Well, as far as, I don't know. I definitely think that using all the resources that you can so that kids can be in charge of their presence, like I was saying earlier, that's going to be giving them the agency that they need to know how they're going to be put out there. That's the most important thing to me, because we are asking them to do something. Teachers all learned this, like when we were recorded for the last however many hours of our lives when we were teaching on Zoom. Just know that that is giving them a form of agency as well, I think, is the big point there.
Okay. Agency. I see we have 3, I think we have 3 more minutes. I'm not looking in the chat as to whether anybody's telling me about the time, but if we've got a couple of these 3 minutes, I guess I'd like to ask you what your big piece of advice is for teachers as they attempt to re-enter this school year. Jim, you're already started teaching.
Week 4.
And so, what can you tell them about re-entering and the power of media as part of that activity? Jessica, why don't you go on that one?
Okay, so there's going to be challenges. There's going to be days when you feel like I just cannot look at this screen one more time or these boxes one more time. But I just would want to encourage you to please continue to learn these new things and to work hard for your students. And I know that that seems trite and kind of like something that people say, but what you're doing, even when it doesn't feel like it's working, is working for your students. So just be there for them, be a presence in their lives that they can always see and come back to, and just be that source. And you're doing a good job even when you think you're not. So that's what I want to leave you with.
That's heartfelt, certainly. How about you, Jim?
Fail forward.
Make
mistakes, learn from them, try it again, pick yourself up, dust yourself off. There's a statement saying there's no mistakes, only lessons, right? So, start small, try it, fail forward. If you can write it, you can message it. If you can message it, you can message it via photos, video, audio, but, start small, fail forward. try little things, try new things, and be okay being uncomfortable with what you're doing. Because if you're totally comfortable, you're probably not doing much. So
Excellent.
Yeah,
Those are
have
wonderful,
fun.
wonderful thoughts. Thank you so much. I can't thank you both. This was a wonderful discussion. Why don't we have 10 more hours? I see Jason's on the screen.
I'm
Jason,
here.
yeah.
Sorry,
take
I'm
it away.
breaking up the fun. This is my job. I'm a party ender. No, but honestly, I really appreciated that conversation. I learned so much. I've been scribbling down ideas. I've got this concept in my head that I kept on hearing over and over again. Not these words, obviously, but the idea of making the invisible visible, like kind of using your classrooms as a space to kind of open the door for so students can see like the way adults or, most adults think about, the media, how they're consuming it, but also kind of flipping the table and allowing students to kind of see the production side of it. How are people thinking about like the kind of rhetorical elements of this, or literally the kind of nuts and bolts of how you put together a video? Like, I love that. I think that really, as an ex-elementary educator, if you could ever be such a thing, I have clear memories of working to kind of convey those ideas. So I really appreciate you guys articulating it so well. Thank you again.
Thank you
Thanks for the
so much.
opportunity.
By now, you can keep this conversation going by joining the after party. Just jump into the discussion thread that was posted in the chat window. You should see that on the right. Also, if you are looking for details on tomorrow's sessions, just check out oc4ss.oerproject.com. It's all there, and we'll meet back here in this same Zoom room tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern. We'll be kicking off day 3 with a special guest that you won't want to miss. Well, that was day 2. And just like scoops of ice cream and Destiny's Children, the best things in life come in 3s. Am I right? So we'll see you tomorrow as we close out the OER conference for social studies with another insightful keynote, 2 more live discussions, and our very special guest. All right, folks, go off and digest these ideas, or dinner, or both. It's your choice. And as always, please answer that very quick Zoom poll. 2 questions, too easy. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Have a good night.